Hello and welcome to this video on simplified openings. In this video, I would like to show you how another way how engines have affected our chess understanding and what is considered acceptable in the opening and what is not. In this video, we feature the Petrosian's variation of the Queen's Indian, and it's something that's, well, what we witnessed, or what I witnessed when seeing this game in particular, and the whole idea was shaking of a decades established truth about the opening. And this always is something unbelievable to me, because I always thought that okay, there are these certain fundamental truths in the opening, positional truths that cannot really be shaken even by the engines, but maybe I was wrong. Yeah. So let me show you what I have in mind. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6, the Queen's Indian. And now Petrosian came up with the prophylactic move a3. So the idea is to go knight c3, yeah, without allowing the Nimzo-Indian pinning bishop b4. Yeah? So prophylactic move a3, covering the b4 square. So now I have played the Queen's Indian quite a bit in my career, somewhere in the first half of the first decade of this century. And against the Petrosian system, I always played the move bishop a6. I kind of liked it better, attacking the pawn on c4, forcing queen c2, and then going c4, c5, after bishop b7, going for some more hedgehog-like positions. But the main move has always been bishop b7. Natural move, obviously, it's part of the Queen's Indian idea to control the e4 square. Knight c3, white establishes the intended development of the knight without allowing bishop b4. And here comes the, very early on, comes the moment where I was shocked. It has always been considered that once the knight comes to c3, white has created the idea of d5. So the knight on c3, the pawn on c4, and the queen on d1 are controlling the d5 square. And white wants to go d5 to shut this bishop on b7 and continue with e4 and establish this excellent bind in the center on the light squares. Therefore, the main move has always been d5. Black plays the move himself, and there is a lot of theory happening here. Also, a move that has existed for decades is the move knight e4. Trying to use the control over the e4 square to force some exchanges after knight e4, bishop e4. This is a quite an acceptable and I think pretty decent way of playing against the Petrosian system, even though white gets some time against the bishop by going knight d2 and e4, but black is doing all right. Lately, there has also been kind of some tendency towards anticipating white's move d5 with the move g6, and this has recently been played by two of the modern teenage prodigies, yeah, if you will, of our times, Arjun Erigaisi and Vincent Keimer. They both played this move g6, whose idea is that in case of d5, black goes bishop g7. So one bishop has been shut, but the other one gets a very good diagonal. So this is actually good for black. And the main move is queen c2, now threatening e4. And now black plays d5. And after cd5, e5, this is the type of position that these players have explored. The games I checked, they won both of their games. One was played online, Korobov Erigaisi, and the other one was played at the Chennai tournament, Robson against Keimer. So these are kind of interesting Queen's Indian type of positions, with the small twist that the bishop is not on d6 as normal in these positions, but rather goes to g7. So this is all understandable when it comes to the fight for this central control, whether that be d5 or e4. Therefore, the move bishop e7 has always been considered like a big, huge positional mistake, maybe a finger feller. Black just automatically plays the move and allows d5, which is basically white's idea, to go d5, go e4, and establish a perfect bind. In fact, I have played this myself with the white pieces, establishing this type of bind. Therefore, you can imagine my shock when I saw that several very strong players have actually played this move bishop e7, allowing d5. And I was wondering, okay, it cannot be that these strong players do not know about d5 and the let's say the advantageous position that white is getting after that. So let's explore a bit deeper and try to understand why they still allowed it. And when I say strong players, I mean players like Varujan Akobian, I mean Hans Niemann, who else? There was also, I noticed, a game by Alice Lee, the promising American player. So these people must know, okay? They study chess, they follow chess, they understand chess. So it can't be just that they have made a finger feather. So let's see what the whole idea is here. Black castles, white goes e4. In a game played by Varujan Agobian, the move g3 was played, and here a very interesting idea for black is the move b5, yeah, undermining white's center. I won't go too much into the details here, but black gets excellent compensation after d6, d6, rook d8, queen d8, rook d8, and now cb5 and knight d5. Yeah. After knight d5, rook d5, and this pawn is under attack, and otherwise black can, if it's defended, and bishop before by e4, bishop b4 is a check. So this is very dangerous for white, and black is doing quite all right here. But obviously the main move is e4. That's the whole idea of d5. Yeah, just play e4, establish this triangle in the center, bury the bishop on b7. As I started exploring, I actually realized that the engine is not so pessimistic as decades of common sense players have been. So the plan the engine actually here suggests for black is the undermining plan of going, once e6 is already played, at some point to go c6 and capture as many times as possible on d5 and establish this center of a black pawn on d6 and white pawn on d5. Symmetrical pawn center, yeah. And it turns out that these positions are not as disadvantageous for black as they were likely considered earlier. So let's continue with d6. Alice Lee actually played in a different way. She first took on d5, played rook e8 and played c6, but generally it should all go into this direction. What's practical from black's aspect is that, let's put the move, the pawn on d6, is that there are basically two plans for white here, and that or even plans, basically setups, because, and that depends where white decides to develop the bishop, on e2 or on d3. So two options, bishop e2 or bishop d3, and another good aspect from black side is that plays identical. Black plays identically, takes on d5, goes c6, takes on d5 again, and we are getting the symmetrical pawn structure in the center. What's also very important from black's aspect is that if white does not go for that structure, black gets very easy game. Black gets an easy game, and I will show you what I mean. So let's start with the move bishop e2, ed5. Yeah. Now, let's say white can take both ways, but like I said, it should all transpose to those positions with pawns on d5 and d6. And just to illustrate, for example, what I meant when that if white does not go for these positions, let's say go ed5, c6, and now takes on c6, knight c6, this type of structure with the pawn on c4 or with the pawn on e4, because white can take cd5 and dc6 then and leave a pawn on e4. Both types of positions are very good and comfortable for black. So let's say short castle, knight e5. Yes, there is an isolated pawn, but there is counterplay in the center against the c4 pawn, and black has good development. So these positions are good for black. So let's say cd5, c6. Now, as I said, dc6, knight c6, castles, again knight e5, the same move. Here there is counterplay against the e4 pawn. And again, no problems for black. So the structure that white should aim for is just to let black take on d5. So castle, cd5, ed5. And this is the type of position we're getting. either with the bishop on e2 or with the bishop on d3, as we shall see. And play for black is more or less identical. Yeah? The knight will come to d7, rook e8, bishop f8, knight going to come from e5 to c5, a6, b5, g6, bishop g7 for the dark squared bishop. And it turns out it's kind of compact and quite acceptable, in fact. So let's say a6. A4 will be played sooner or later because white would like to restrain black on the queen side. Otherwise, black will go knight bd7, b5, knight b6 with even more comfortable development than after a4. So let's say knight bd7, bishop e3, rook e8, h3 to stop some knight g4 ideas. Yeah, bishop f8. Yeah, and you see black is very compact. There is some pressure on d5, which ties down white's pieces somewhat. The bishop is relocated to the long open diagonal. Yeah, and after g6, bishop g7, more or less all, and rook c8, let's say, more or less all black's pieces will have good squares too. Also, in these types of positions, keep in mind the, let's say, the typical exchange sacrifice rook takes e3, which has been played by Anderson in similar positions, and which increases black's control over the dark squares, and it can give good compensation, positional compensation. But even without that, let's say bishop c4 to activate the bishop and strengthen the defense of the d5 pawn, g6, let's say knight d4, maybe threatening some knight c6, then knight e5, attacking the bishop, controlling c6, bishop b3, rook c8, still controlling c6, maybe intending knight c4 and so on, with pretty unclear middle game. So that's the analysis of the middle game, let's say, more or less approximative analysis, let's say, with the white bishop on e2. Now let's go back and let's check bishop d3, e takes d5. I think this is, like, again, we are going for the same plan of undermining white center. And this is a much better plan than how the players have tried to play this position. For example, Niemann played an online game against Theodoru, and he played something like a5, knight d7, knight c5, but this was just bad. This type of positions, yes, then the bishop is bad on b7, white enjoys the space advantage, and black doesn't really have counterplay. Even though it may look like some sort of a King's Indian, it's not quite the same. Yeah, the bishop is bad, and this is something that black should avoid. But the plan with e takes d5 is perfectly fine. Yeah. Now let's examine again the different pawn structures. Let's say cd5, c6, dc6, knight c6, castles, knight e5. Yeah. Again, exactly the same. This time even better, perhaps, because the bishop on d3 is also targeted. Here maybe there is an additional option of, let's say, knight d4 with the bishop on d3 as the knight comes to f5. Let's say cd5, ed5, knight bd7, knight f5. But even exchanging the dark squared bishop doesn't really affect black's play much. Knight e5, going after the bishop, bishop e2, rook e8. Now black wants to rearrange the pieces. Bishop f8, knight fd7, g6, bishop g7, something like this. Yeah. And if the bishop is exchanged, take on e7, rook e7 or queen e7, bishop g5, rook e8, let's say, castles h6. It transpires that white cannot maintain the pin because bishop h4 can be met by knight g6, getting rid of the bishop on h4. And if bishop e3, then queen c8 is a knight move, and the bishop is going, queen is going to f5. Yeah. So the presence of the bishop pair is not really felt because the position is relatively closed and black is very strong on the dark squares. And white's unopposed bishop, which is the dark squared bishop, is well controlled by black's presence on the dark squares. So that's this type of, let's say, idea of knight d4, knight f5, and you also checked here the dc6 pawn structure. Now let's go with d5, c6. Again, dc6, knight c6, castles, knight e5 is fine. There is a threat against the knight on f3 and the bishop on d3, which is perfectly fine for black now. So castles, cd5, cd5, and knight d7. So you're getting more or less the same. Let's say rook e1, rook e8, bishop f4, a6, usual move, yeah, tending b5, a4, bishop f8. Yeah, rooks can be exchanged. Yeah, knight can come maybe to c5 to target the bishop, then g6, bishop g7, so the queen defends the pawn on d6. Yeah, then again, complex middle game ahead, and black has an acceptable position at the very least. So, what to conclude from this? Yeah, accepted old age wisdom that d5 is a threat that should be stopped, and the fact that bishop e7 is a bad move. Does it still hold true? Honestly, I'm not sure. And well, perhaps that's normal. Perhaps that's normal, as engines force us to rethink and reevaluate basically everything in chess. So no stone is left unturned. And yeah, I think as time goes by, more and more of these old established truths may be challenged. And okay, well, time changes, and well, we can look at this in a more positive way, that we examine new truths and we understand the game of chess better. Well, at least I would like to think more positively when it comes to this. So guys, thanks for watching. This was this kind of a video, that surprising one, yeah, but I think still eye-opening, at least for me. So make sure you check out my Chessable courses, my newsletter on Substack. If you would like to support my work, consider becoming a paid subscriber on my Substack. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you smash that subscribe button, and let's keep the channel growing. So thanks for watching, guys, and see you soon next week. Cheers.